Hello and welcome to this lecture where we'll go into the strings concepts in DuckDB. You may have heard of data types like VARCHAR in databases, and you may have seen VARCHAR, you may have seen text, and you may have seen string. These are actually interchangeable. We'll go into these concepts and then we will go into slicing and working with strings and also going into regular expressions. There's a lot of things you can do with strings in DuckDB in particular. And if you're coming from Python, then you will knowing that the concepts of slicing a little bit different in DuckDB since we're counting from 1 instead of counting from 0. Let's move on to the slides and to the concepts. Here I am in the slides working with strings in SQL and DuckDB to format and clean text. What does this mean? Let's find out. Text data types and their distinctions in DuckDB. As I said in the introduction, there are 3 data types for strings, but basically they're the same. We have varchar, variable length characters. This is efficient for general text storage, and it's variable length character string. It means that there is no length limit actually. In other SQL dialects you may have seen, varchar, there's a length limit. But actually in DuckDB there is no one. Instead here you use, for example, varchar 20, it's only for documentation. It's not enforced, which means that it's not enforced. This is documenting there's 20 characters as a max, but actually you can go through that. And for varchar, there's aliases for varchar, and these are text and string. These are used interchangeably. You can create a column with text, string, or varchar. It's the same thing in DuckDB. And then we move on to using array like slicing and indexing to get substrings. You note that in previous lecture I've used the substring function to get the substring in for a particular column. You can actually use slicing, similar syntax to Python if you're used to that. Here you have, for example, SQL word, and you have SQL word :2. This will give you slices from index 1 to 2. Note that SQL counts from 1. And here you slices from index 2 to 5. It gets the substring composing of characters on index 2 to 5. And here you can use indexing using the bracket operator. Returns empty string if you take 0, as there is no string in 0th position. And here it gets the last character in the string. Similar to Python, this is quite nice. We can use the string functions to transform text. For example, here you want to transform, you use different string functions. You can use upper, trim, inside of the parenthesis goes first. Trim, SQL word, comma, this is a space, it trims the excessive spaces. And then you make upper, and then it becomes uppercase as trimmed word. Here you can get trimmed word of 1, and here you can get trimmed word of -1. These are, you get different characters after you have cleaned it, right? Here, this is composition of functions or nested functions. That is possible in SQL and DuckDB as well. And many useful text functions in the documentation. This is from the documentation directly. Here you have several text functions which you can use. Take a look into that. I'll leave it in the description. It's good to find out what type of string functions exist. What can I use for cleaning my particular strings? And then we have something called regget, regular expression. For more complex pattern matching, you may want to match a certain type of text data. For example, you use it by using regex replace. Here you use trim description, trim the column. After trim, it removes the space, right? And then here I use regex replace. I replace one or more spaces with one space. And here I use similar thing, but with lower, we make it into lowercase as well. Here it replaces every matching of the pattern, this pattern, it's a space plus, right? One or more spaces, and replaces it with one space. This is a way to clean data when we have several spaces and irregular number of spaces. I'll show you that in an example later on in the coding, where we'll try to do this. And then we'll talk a little bit about schemas to divide into layers for structure. Here I create a schema called staging. Here is usually where you have your raw data. You put in your raw data into the staging. The staging schema is used to represent the staging layer, the landing zone for the data. I talk about it here because I want to introduce the concept slowly, and we will go towards more data warehouse-like structure with more layers, where you have the staging layer in the beginning, and then you have a refine layer, and then you have something called a marts layer. But that will be later on when we come to data warehouse course. But you should know that staging is usually used for a landing zone. Here I put in the data. And then you could have a schema that is called refine, where you have actually done some transformation here and you have cleaned the data. One thing to note is that usually you don't use DuckDB directly to transform all the data in many cases. For example, you could connect DuckDB to dbt and use dbt to actually transform the data into the refine layer, where you use the DuckDB as just a database. Using dbt, then it will translate the SQL into DuckDB. Here you have another schema that's called refined, and for that you create a table, and the same table as the same name as before, but it's inside the refined layer or the refined schema, where you have done all your cleaning here, right? Refine layer or warehouse layers. In this lecture, we've gone through strings. You know that string, varchar, and text is the same. You know that there is no length limit in varchar. It's just for documentation and not enforced. And then we took a look into some slicing and some string functions, which you can use to transform the data and clean the data. Talking about cleaning the data, it's good to divide it into different schemas. You have one that is staging, where you have the raw data, and then in the next schema or the next layer is the refine layer, where you have your clean data. And I talked a little bit about the dbt as well. Maybe in the future you won't be using DuckDB alone for this. But for now, since we're learning about DuckDB, we use DuckDB to transform as well. Yes, I hope that you learned a lot in this video, and see you in the next one, where we'll actually go in and code out string and the string functions. That will be very interesting, to use string functions to clean data. See you there. Bye.